The day after they buried her husband, my neighbor stood on my porch like she had nowhere else left to stand. Her eyes were red, her hands were shaking, and the quiet between us felt louder than the street. My name is Nathan Reed. I am 34 years old, and I live in a quiet neighborhood outside Seattle, Washington. I work as a software analyst. I am not the kind of guy people notice. I go to work, I come home, I eat, I watch something, and I sleep. I like my life calm, predictable, safe. Until Sophie Bennett knocked on my door. She lived right next door. Sophie was 38, striking in a way that made you look twice, even when you tried not to. Calm, hazel eyes. Dark hair that always looked like it belonged in a movie, even when she wore it simple. She had this quiet strength that stayed in your mind long after she walked away. She was married to David Bennett, an older guy, late 40s maybe. He always looked rushed, like life was a checklist he was trying to finish before anyone noticed he was tired. Over the years, Sophie and I had exchanged polite hellos. A wave. A quick smile. That was it. They kept to themselves, and I did the same. Then last week, David died. A heart attack. Sudden. One moment he was there, the next he was gone, and the whole neighborhood found out in hours. People stood in driveways, whispering like sadness was gossip. I watched from my window and felt that weird feeling you get when tragedy happens close by, but not to you. Like you are standing near a fire and still feeling warm, even though you are not burning. I did not go to the funeral. It did not feel like my place. I barely knew them, but the next day, around 4 in the afternoon, Sophie knocked on my door. I was working from home, wearing a hoodie and sweatpants, hair a mess, coffee cold on my desk. When I opened the door, she stood there, in a long black coat, with her hair pulled back tight. Her face looked tired, in a way sleep could not fix. In one hand she held a small cup, like it was the only steady thing in her world. "Hi, Nathan," she said, voice soft and careful. "Do you mind if I come in for a minute?" My first instinct was to freeze, not because I did not want her inside, but because I did not know what to do with a moment like this. A grieving widow on my porch, the day after the funeral. It felt like a line you do not cross, even if you want to. But her eyes were asking for something simple. Not romance, not comfort in the way people talk about in movies. Just not being alone. "Of course," I said, stepping back. "Yeah, come in." She walked inside like she was afraid the floor might break under her. I led her into my living room and pointed to the couch. She sat down slowly, hands folded in her lap. I went to the kitchen and put water on to boil, because doing something felt better than standing there helpless. When I brought her tea, she stared at the steam rising from the cup. For a long moment, she did not speak. I did not push her. I had no idea what to say anyway. Finally, she whispered, "It's too quiet next door." I thought I could handle it, but I don't want to be alone right now. I nodded, like that was normal. Like a woman who just lost her husband always came to the neighbor's house for tea. "You don't have to explain," I told her. "You can just sit here." Her shoulders dropped a little, like she had been holding her breath all day and finally let it out. We sat there sipping tea, and the silence did not feel awkward. It felt heavy but not uncomfortable, like the room was doing the talking for us. After a while, she started to speak again, slow and careful, like she was opening a drawer that had been stuck for years. "David and I," she said, staring into her cup, "we weren't perfect. The last couple of years we grew distant. Sometimes I felt more like his roommate than his wife." She wasn't crying. It was worse than crying. It was the kind of honesty that comes when you are too tired to pretend. Then she looked up at me and said, "I know it sounds awful, but part of me feels like I already grieved this. Like I lost him emotionally long before I lost him physically." I did not know how to answer that. So I did the only thing I could do. I listened. My silence didn't scare her away. It seemed to give her permission to keep going. She talked about nights eating dinner alone, even when David was in the house. About him traveling more. About conversations that turned into quick updates instead of real connection. About how lonely it feels when someone is beside you, but not with you. Then she asked, almost like she hated the question, "Have you ever felt like you're slowly disappearing in your own home?" Quote. I swallowed. I hadn't lived her life, but I knew loneliness. I knew what it felt like to come home to the same quiet, night after night, and pretend it was peace when sometimes it was just empty. "I think I understand," I said softly. Her eyes held mine for a second, and something passed between us that I couldn't name. Not love, not desire. Something simpler, two people seeing each other for real. Before she left, she looked around my living room, like she was memorizing the warmth. "It's warm here," she said, almost to herself. Then she stood, pulled her coat close, and walked back across the grass to her house. After she left, my house felt different, like her sadness had settled into the corners, and I could not pretend it wasn't there. The next morning, I could not focus. I had emails to answer and reports due, but my mind kept replaying the way she held her cup like it was keeping her together, the way she said the house was too quiet, the way she looked at me when she asked if it was awful to feel what she felt. By noon, I realized I had not eaten. I was staring at the same document for 15 minutes when I heard a knock. I opened the door, and there she was again. No long coat this time, no makeup. Just jeans, sneakers, and a gray hoodie that hung off her shoulders like she put it on without thinking. In her hands were 2 brown paper bags from the deli down the street. "I figured you probably forgot to eat," she said, a small half-smile on her lips. I blinked, caught off guard. I almost did. She stepped inside like it was natural, like she belonged there, and the strange part was that it did feel natural. We took the food out back to my patio. The sky was gray, the air cool, and the trees behind the fence moved gently in the wind. She handed me a turkey sandwich and unwrapped her own with quiet care. For a while, we ate without talking. Then she said, "It's strange. I thought I'd feel more devastated. I thought I'd wake up crying. But instead, I feel empty, like I'm walking through someone else's life." She kept her eyes on the trees as she spoke, like she couldn't look at me and say it. "I've had this knot in my chest for so long, Nathan," she continued. "Even before David died, the grief started years ago, when things between us changed. When we stopped really seeing each other. I let her talk. I didn't interrupt. I didn't try to fix it. I just stayed with her in the truth." Then she sighed and gave a small, embarrassed laugh. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to dump all that on you. I just didn't know who else to talk to." "You don't have to apologize," I said. "Sometimes you just need someone to sit with." Quote. She finally looked at me then, and there was something grateful in her face, like she didn't expect kindness to be this simple. After that, the conversation shifted. We talked about small things. Favorite coffee shops. Movies. The time she adopted a cat that ran away a week later. I told her about the time I accidentally sent a company-wide email with a typo that turned public announcement into something far worse. She laughed, really laughed, and it surprised me how much that sound hit my chest, like a light turning on in a room I forgot existed. At one point, her hand brushed mine on the patio table. It stayed there for 1 second, maybe 2, long enough for me to feel the warmth, long enough for my heart to react before my brain caught up. She pulled her hand back quickly, and her face changed, like guilt had tapped her shoulder. "I should go," she said suddenly, standing up. "This is probably too soon. I don't want you to think I'm using you as some kind of emotional crutch." "You're not," I said, standing too. "I mean that." Quote. She hesitated at the door, eyes flicking over my face like she was searching for a reason to believe me. "I just didn't want to be alone today," she said. "Then don't be," I replied. "Anytime you need to talk or not talk, I'm here." She nodded slowly, and for a second I thought she might say something else, something honest, something dangerous. Instead, she whispered, "Thanks, Nathan. Really." Then she walked back to her house, arms folded over her chest like she was holding herself together. The rest of the day dragged. I tried to work, but my mind kept going back to her hand brushing mine, and the way her laugh sounded like it came from somewhere she thought she lost. The next day started cloudy again. I sat at my kitchen table with lukewarm coffee, staring at emails that meant nothing. At some point, I found myself looking out the window toward her backyard. Sophie was standing near her porch, arms wrapped tightly around herself. She looked small, like she didn't know where to put her pain. 10 minutes passed, then 15. Then came the knock. I knew it was her before I opened the door. Sophie stood there in a navy sweater that slipped slightly off one shoulder and black leggings. Her face looked exhausted, but her eyes held something stronger than sadness. "Can I come in?" she asked softly. And in that moment, with her standing on my porch again, I realized this was no longer just a neighbor needing a kind place to sit. Something was beginning, something neither of us planned, and I wasn't sure if I should be afraid of it or grateful. Sophie walked past me like she was afraid she might change her mind if she stayed too close to the door. She did not rush to the couch this time. She slowed in the middle of my living room, eyes moving over the space like she was trying to remember what safety felt like. "I wasn't planning to come," she said, almost annoyed at herself. "I've been going back and forth for the past hour. But I didn't know where else to go." "You don't need a reason," I told her. "If you're here, you're here." She nodded, then sat on the couch, curling into the corner like she wanted to take up less space. I sat in the chair across from her, not too close, not too far. The clock ticked on the wall. Outside, a car passed, then the street went quiet again. "I don't know how to be alone," she said finally. Her voice was low, steady, but tired. "I went from living with my parents to living with David. That's all I've ever known. There was always someone. Now it's just me." I swallowed. I could see how hard it was for her to admit that out loud. "It's a hard change," I said. "Even when you think you're ready, your body still feels it." She let out a slow breath. "The worst part is, I felt alone for a long time, even before he passed. It's like I was mourning the end of us before he was even gone." Her eyes lifted to mine, and there was a quiet fear there, not fear of me, fear of the truth. "That kind of loneliness is brutal," I said. "It messes with your head." Sophie stared down at her hands. She was picking at the edge of her sleeve like she was trying to hold herself together with small movements. Then she looked up again, and her voice dropped even more. "Do you think it's wrong that I don't feel guilty being here?" I didn't answer fast. Not because I was unsure, but because I knew my words mattered. "No," I said gently. "I don't think there's a clock for grief. And I don't think connection has a schedule either. Sometimes you find a safe place when you need it most. That doesn't make you a bad person." Her eyes softened like she had been waiting for permission to breathe. "I didn't expect to feel drawn to someone right now," she whispered. The air shifted in the room. I felt it, the way her words sat between us, dangerous and honest. "I didn't expect it either," I admitted. Sophie looked away quickly, like she was embarrassed she said it. "I don't want you to think I'm trying to replace him. I'm not even sure what I'm doing." "I don't think that," I said. "I think you're trying to survive the quiet." She nodded, and her throat tightened. "I don't want to go back there tonight," she said. "Not because I'm running away. Because I can't sit in that house again. I feel like I'm going to suffocate." Quote. The way she said it made my chest tighten. This was not drama. This was a woman reaching the edge of what she could carry alone. I stood up slowly. "You can stay here?" I said. "I have a guest room. It's not fancy, but it's clean." Sophie blinked like she didn't expect me to offer that. "I don't want to be a burden," she said. "You're not," I answered. "You're a person. You're my neighbor. And right now you need somewhere to breathe." Her eyes turned glassy, but she didn't cry. She just nodded once, like her body finally believed it could stop fighting for a minute. I grabbed clean sheets from the closet and made up the spare room at the end of the hall. I kept my movements calm, steady. I didn't want her to feel like she had to apologize for taking up space. When I came back, she was still on the couch, holding the mug of tea I'd made like it was warmth she could drink. "I didn't realize how tired I was," she said quietly. "That happens when you've been holding too much for too long," I replied. We didn't talk much after that. We sat in the same room, both of us listening to the quiet without letting it swallow her. At some point, I turned on a soft lamp instead of the overhead light, and the living room looked less like a place to grieve and more like a place to rest. Before she went to the guest room, she stood near the hallway, hesitating like she wasn't sure what to do with herself. "Thank you, Nathan," she said, "for not asking too many questions, for making me feel like a person again." She stepped forward and hugged me. It wasn't romantic, it wasn't planned, it was human. Her head rested against my shoulder, and I felt her breath shake once, like she was fighting to keep control. I held her gently, steady and careful, like the wrong kind of pressure might break something in her. When she pulled back, her eyes met mine for a second longer than normal. "Good night," she whispered. "Good night," I said. She walked down the hall and disappeared into the guest room. I stood there alone, and my house felt different again. Not because she was in it, but because of what her presence meant. Sophie had just buried her husband, and she was sleeping under my roof. Nothing about that was simple, yet somehow it felt like the most natural thing in the world. I didn't sleep much. Not because I was expecting something to happen. Nothing did. But I was aware of her, aware of the silence between our rooms, aware that I wanted her to feel safe, and that I didn't know what that meant for me. When the sky finally started to brighten, I got up and moved quietly. I brewed coffee, then stood by the kitchen window with the warm mug in both hands. The backyard looked washed out in the morning light. The air outside was damp, and the clouds hung low like they were waiting to break. A few minutes later, I heard soft footsteps. Sophie appeared in the hallway, wrapped in a light gray blanket from the guest room. Her hair was messy, her face calm but tired. No makeup, no armor. Just her. "Morning," she said softly. "Hey," I replied with a small smile. "I made coffee." She nodded and stepped into the kitchen. When I handed her a mug, our fingers touched for a second. It was nothing, but it felt like something. We stood there sipping quietly, and the silence between us felt restful, not empty. After a while, she sat at the table, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "I have no idea what I'm doing," she said. I sat across from her. "I don't think you're supposed to. You're just figuring it out 1 minute at a time." She stared at the coffee like it might tell her what to do next. "I keep thinking about how it felt here yesterday," she said. "Sitting, talking, breathing. It felt like I got a tiny piece of myself back." Then she looked up at me, and her eyes held something deeper than grief. "David and I weren't really a couple anymore," she said. "We lived together. We shared a life on paper, but emotionally we were strangers." I didn't even realize how empty I became until I left that house. I listened. I didn't judge. I knew she wasn't insulting him. She was telling the truth she never said out loud. "I came here because I couldn't take the silence," she continued. "And now I don't want to go back yet. Not today." Quote, "You don't have to," I said. So she stayed, not because we made a plan, not because we talked about rules. She stayed because the day felt too heavy for her to carry alone. I made scrambled eggs and toast. She helped without me asking, like she needed her hands busy. She found a single pink sock in my laundry basket and laughed like she couldn't believe I owned something that wasn't gray or black. Later, we took a slow walk around the neighborhood. The air smelled like wet pavement and pine. A couple neighbors waved, and I felt their eyes linger on us a little too long. Sophie noticed too. Her shoulders tightened, and she stepped a bit closer to me without thinking. When we got back, she didn't say much. But she didn't pull away either. That evening, I cooked simple pasta and salad. We ate in my kitchen like it was normal, like she didn't have a house full of memories next door, like my quiet life hadn't been cracked open by her presence. After dinner, we ended up on the couch. A nature documentary played on the TV, but neither of us really watched it. Sophie held a cup of tea in both hands, staring at the screen without seeing it. "It's strange," she said quietly. "I feel peace here, like I'm allowed to just be." I turned slightly toward her. "You don't have to rush anything," I said. "There's no script for this." She looked up at me. Her eyes searched mine like she was trying to find the edge of what was safe. "Do you think it's wrong?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper, "that it feels good to be here with you?" My heart thudded once, hard. "I think it means you're human," I said, "and you've been lonely for a long time." Her head leaned against my shoulder. I didn't move at first. I didn't want to take advantage of a fragile moment. But when she stayed there, when her body relaxed like she trusted me, my arms slowly wrapped around her. We sat like that, quiet, her head against me, my hand resting on her upper arm. It was comfort, simple and steady. Then she lifted her face slightly, and our eyes met. Her breath caught, just a little. I felt her hesitation like it was my own. The fear, the guilt, the need, all tangled together. Sophie leaned in slowly, carefully, like she was asking a question she wasn't sure she deserved to ask. Her lips touched mine for a brief, gentle kiss. It wasn't hungry. It wasn't wild. It was soft and careful, like both of us were holding our breath. Then she pulled back quickly, eyes wide. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't let the panic take over the moment." "You don't have to be," I said quietly. "But we should be honest about what that was." She stared at me, and I saw the fear again. Not fear of me, fear of what it meant. Because that kiss wasn't just comfort anymore. It was the start of something neither of us planned, and now we had to decide if we were going to step back or step closer. After that kiss, Sophie went still. Her eyes stayed on mine like she was waiting for me to say something that would either save her or break her. I didn't move closer. I didn't reach for her again. I just stayed calm, because I could tell she needed steadiness more than anything. "It's okay," I said softly. "We don't have to rush. We can take it one day at a time." Her shoulders dropped a little, like she'd been holding herself tight for weeks and finally loosened. She nodded once, then looked down at her tea like she was ashamed to meet my eyes again. "I don't know what's wrong with me," she whispered. "I should be crying in my house. I should be doing what a widow is supposed to do." "There's no one right way to grieve," I told her. "You're not wrong for needing comfort." She breathed out, slow and shaky. "I'm scared people will think I'm horrible." "I don't care what people think," I said, then paused. "But I do care how you feel. If you want space, I'll give it. If you want company, I'll be here." That was the first time she looked relieved. That night, she didn't go back to the guest room right away. She stayed on the couch, curled up under a blanket. I sat at the other end, giving her room. We watched the rest of the documentary without really watching. Every few minutes, her fingers tightened around the mug, and I could tell her mind was somewhere else. When it got late, she stood slowly. "I should sleep," she said. "You can use the guest room again," I offered. She hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you." At the hallway, she stopped and turned back. "Nathan." "Yeah?" Her voice was quiet. "Please don't hate me tomorrow." My chest tightened. "I won't." She held my gaze for a moment longer, then walked down the hall. The next morning, I woke up with a strange mix of calm and nerves, like my life was still my life, but something new had been added to it, something fragile and real. I made coffee and kept the kitchen quiet. When Sophie came out, she looked like she hadn't slept much either. Her hair was messy, her face bare, but her eyes were clearer than the day before. "Morning," she said. "Morning," I replied, handing her a mug. She took it and sat at the table, wrapping her hands around it like she needed the heat. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then she said, "I keep thinking about that kiss." I nodded. "Me too." Her cheeks flushed slightly and she looked away. I didn't plan it. I just felt safe for a second, and I didn't want to lose that feeling. Quote, "I didn't feel used," I said. "I felt close to you." She looked back at me, and the fear in her eyes softened into something else. "I'm not ready to be someone's girlfriend," she said quickly, like she needed to say it before she lost courage. "I'm not ready for a label. I'm barely ready to be myself." "I'm not asking for that," I told her. "I just want to be here with you. Whatever pace you need." Her eyes shimmered and she nodded slowly. "Okay." That day she went back to her house for a few hours. She said she needed to face it again. She needed to sort through David's things, to make decisions she didn't want to make. Before she left, she stood at my door and looked at me like she was about to fall apart again. "If it gets too heavy," I said, "come back." She gave a small, grateful smile. "I will." The hours she was gone felt longer than they should have. I tried to work, but my mind kept drifting. I kept picturing her in that quiet house, surrounded by memories and silence. By late afternoon, I heard a soft knock. When I opened the door, Sophie stood there holding a small cardboard box. Her hands were shaking. "I tried," she said. "I really tried, but I found his watch on the dresser, and it just hit me." I stepped aside without a word, and she walked in. She put the box down on my coffee table and sank onto the couch, covering her face with her hands. Her shoulders started to tremble, and the quiet sobs that came out of her sounded like they'd been trapped inside her for weeks. I sat beside her, not touching at first, just being there. Then she reached for my hand like she couldn't help it. I took it. She leaned into me, and this time I wrapped my arms around her fully. She cried into my shoulder, and I held her like she was something precious that had been dropped too many times. "I feel awful," she said through tears. "Because I miss him, but I also don't miss what we became." "That's not awful," I whispered. "That's honest." Her crying slowed, but she stayed close, breathing against my chest. When she finally pulled back, her eyes were swollen, but calmer. "I'm sorry," she said. "Stop apologizing," I replied gently. "You're allowed to feel." That night, she didn't stay in the guest room. She didn't ask directly. She just sat beside me on the couch, and when it got late, she looked at me with that quiet intensity again. "I don't want to be alone tonight," she said. My heart pounded, but I kept my voice steady. "You don't have to be." I led her down the hall, not to my bedroom, but to the guest room. Because I wanted her to know this wasn't about taking. It was about care. She sat on the edge of the bed, looking small again. I stood by the door, giving her the chance to say no, to change her mind. She reached out and took my hand. "Stay with me," she whispered. So I did. I lay on top of the blanket beside her, not pushing, not rushing. She turned toward me and rested her head on my chest, like she had been doing for days. My arm wrapped around her, and we stayed like that in the quiet. After a long time, she looked up at me. Her eyes were wet but steady. "I think I'm ready to move forward," she said. Not fast, not like nothing happened, but forward. Quote, I swallowed hard. "I want that too." She stared at my lips for a second, then leaned in again. This kiss was still gentle, but it wasn't a question anymore. It was an answer. When she pulled back, she touched my face softly, like she was making sure I was real. "I don't want to forget David," she said, "but I don't want to live in that empty place anymore." "You won't forget him," I said. "And you won't be stuck either." From that moment we changed, but not in a loud way. Over the next few weeks, Sophie started coming over every morning for coffee. Some days, she stayed 10 minutes. Some days, she stayed hours. She went through David's things slowly, one drawer at a time. Sometimes she'd bring something over just to show me, then put it back in the box because she wasn't ready to let it go. People in the neighborhood started noticing. A few looks. A few whispers. One woman even asked Sophie at the mailbox if she was doing okay in that tone that meant she wanted details. Sophie told me about it later, and her hands shook with anger and shame. "I hate them," she said. "I hate how they look at me." I took her hand. "Let them look. They don't get a vote in your healing." She stared at me for a second, then smiled. A real smile. Stronger than before. One Saturday, about a month later, she invited me to her house for dinner. I hadn't been inside since that first night she came to my door, and when I stepped in, the air felt different. Still heavy, but not suffocating. Like she had opened the windows of her life. She cooked simple pasta, and we ate on the back patio as the sun fell behind the trees. The sky turned orange and soft, and for the first time, I saw her look peaceful in her own space. Halfway through dinner, she reached across the table and took my hand without hesitation. "I think I'm ready," she said. "Ready for what?" I asked. "Ready to stop punishing myself," she replied. "Ready to accept that what I had with David ended a long time before his heart stopped. And ready to accept that what I feel with you is not betrayal, it's a second chance." My throat tightened. I squeezed her hand. "I'm not going to rush you," I said, "but I'm here. I want to be here." She nodded, and her eyes filled, but this time it wasn't only grief, it was relief. Months passed, and it didn't become some perfect fairy tale. Sophie still had hard days, anniversaries, memories, times when she'd go quiet and stare out the window like she was talking to the past. But she stopped doing it alone. And I stopped living my life like it was meant to stay small and predictable. One evening, we sat on my porch watching the rain fall softly. Sophie leaned into me and said, "I used to think love was supposed to be loud, big gestures, big promises. But this feels different." "Different how?" I asked. "Like home," she said. Like I can breathe. I kissed the top of her head, and I realized I felt it too. It wasn't just about a widow and her neighbor. It was about two people finding each other in the quiet after loss and choosing to build something gentle and real, one day at a time. If you enjoyed this story, share it with someone who loves emotional love stories, and follow for more romantic audio stories.